Alright, hi everyone. So for this project, I decided to take a look into the healthcare disparity that kind of exists in the healthcare industry between transgender people and non-transgender individuals. So one of the first things that we should first look at is what is the overall social dilemma. Um, there's not a lot of focus that has recently been put on this, but the healthcare system in America is actually been increasingly known to be rampant with discrimination against transgendered individuals. And a lot of the recent studies that I was looking at showed me numbers as high as 31% of the transgender population that is denied proper health care. Um, there are many factors that kind of result in this number that I'm going to discuss later, but a lot of it has to do with the discrimination that's kind of associated with the stigma against trans individuals, as well as trans people themselves being afraid of the stigma and not visiting the proper healthcare facilities because of fear and a lot of other factors that, like I said, I'm going to discuss later in this presentation. So one of the first things we should look at is the stigma that exists in the healthcare industry and throughout society, actually, which leads to the stigma in the healthcare industry. One of the main reasons that healthcare for trans people has become a problem is because the normalization that sort of we saw with homosexuality in our society has not yet occurred for the trans identity. There's still a very big barrier, I think, in the thought process of society that inhibits us from being able to accept the trans identity. And that is something that, with increased visibility, I think will make the journey in society. But as of now, this stigma exists in our society. And to understand why this stigma exists, I think it's really important to look at how important gender roles are. Gender roles, I think, as we learn in this class, are sort of very rigid structures that assign qualities and responsibilities by gender. Men are expected to be manly, they're supposed to take care of families, women are supposed to be soft, gentle mothers, and these are the sort of roles that are assigned to everyone as soon as they're born. Transgender people sort of violate these structures that we've created in our society. They switch from the gender that they're born with, their sex, and they identify their gender as being the opposite. Again, it's really important to understand the difference here between sex and gender because sex is based off of the genitalia that we're born with, whereas gender is very different from that. I think that's also something as a society that we haven't learned to differentiate. But again, gender roles is, I think, the main reason that there's a lot of stigma against transgendered people because they can't follow these sort of set societal rules. So what does this have to say about the way that we've structured a society? What we've noticed historically is that society is only a comfortable place for men. I know there's a lot of differences based off of race, but looking just at gender, there's a very big chunk of power that's given to men. And in the structures that we've created, there isn't really place for anyone who doesn't fit into the straight cisgendered format. There's a lot of people that we didn't know are born into the wrong body, into the wrong gender, and identify themselves as trans. This is a concept that is newly introduced into our social conversation, so not a lot of people can wrap their heads around it. But I think once this topic was introduced, we began to understand how much we assign our lives based off of the gender that we're born with. So there's some hypotheses here as to why it sometimes becomes such a big struggle to accept people into society and break the norms. I think one of the main ones is that these norms give a lot of power to some very specific people, and when we break these rules, that power is sort of diffused across society into a lot of different communities that were generally ignored and didn't have power at all. I think for those that were in power, that have always been in power, this seems like a threat to them. It looks like they're losing they're losing their rights by giving rights to others. Of course, it doesn't work like that, but I do believe that this is a mindset that has been instilled and needs to be overcome, definitely. So what are the consequences of this ignorance? So first, let's look at one thing that everyone cares about, which is money. What we've seen is when transgender individuals are denied proper care, we witness a higher suicide rate amongst their communities, and this results from a lot of things, whether that's physical care. I know mental health becomes really difficult in these communities to deal with, and not just amongst the trans people, but their friends and families who sort of suffer through these problems with them. This results in a higher expenditure in Medicaid costs, a lot of medical bills that remain unpaid, etc. And what this does is diffuse this money into society, and so a lot of people see tax increases. And no, this is not just due to trans people. Of course, there's a higher problem with healthcare, which I'm not going to go into, but again, the trans people are a large portion of the communities that are denied proper health care. Sorry about that. Alright, and there's also a personal struggle that we see with doctors who try to help but don't have the proper education on healthcare. They do have responsibilities to take care of everybody, but are not always able to because the education system doesn't properly cover trans needs, because trans people were not accepted and there was no need to learn about them and teach others about them. So that's something that we see the medical industry suffer from, this lack of knowledge. So let's go back to the statistic that we saw in the beginning of 31% of people that haven't been able to have access to proper healthcare and why this may occur. So one of the most shocking and basic ways that trans people are denied healthcare is when doctors refuse to accept certain patients because they usually either don't have the adequate information to perform the treatments, or even in some cases, as we've seen, a physician can even recommend a procedure that some doctors and surgeons refuse to carry out because of discrimination. There's also a lot of problems with the insurance companies where some policies are more expensive for trans people, and often some policies are not even extended because people don't want to cover transgender people due to the stigma that we discussed earlier. And another reason that the 31% of trans people are unable to get health care is because there is a fear in a lot of the societies that, one, either they're not out and don't want to put themselves in a position to have to reveal that, or two, that they're afraid of the discrimination and they'd rather self-medicate or do self-treatment, which kind of traps them into a vicious cycle of poor health. So what is being done in Illinois about this disparity? So Illinois is actually one of the few states that has seen great advancements in addressing the quality and consistency of healthcare for trans individuals. Recently, the Illinois Department of Insurance passed a lot of policies that address the discrimination that occurs within the insurance companies that cover trans people. A lot of medical policies have also been passed so that treatments that are usually denied to trans people, such as hormone therapy and regular blood tests, which are all treatments that are really easily available for cisgendered individuals, these procedures are now being protected under non-discriminatory charges, which makes it easier for these treatments to be provided to trans people. There's a lot of national associations that are here in Illinois that are being addressed straightforward to fix these practices and, mitigate the disparity between the healthcare provided to trans people. So I know in our local communities, transgender healthcare discrimination is not something that's very commonly talked about, but it should be, because as there is more visibility and more people feel comfortable coming out, we need to ensure that we provide them the proper care that they will need. In our societies, we're going to see a lot of people that we may recognize, some people that we may not, but it's important for us to be able to identify their rights and their needs and welcome them into a society that treats them equally so that we can mitigate any sort of discrimination in our world. And every single person is important in this struggle, regardless of your opinion on the rights of transgendered individuals. What we can agree on that having access to healthcare is one of the most basic and unalienable rights that can be afforded to humans. We have to ensure that proper care is provided to those who need it, and to prevent these really unfortunate practices, the suicides, and the complications that people get from treating themselves, we have to begin to identify the facilities that are known for denying these rights to our trans peers. I know locally there's a lot of organizations such as GLAAD and the National LGBTQ Task Force, which do a really great job about bringing people together to raise awareness and also raise money for trans people. In Illinois, the ACLU has recently been very prominent in uncovering discriminatory practices, and these are all really good organizations to get involved with if you want to be able to help your trans peers. And of course, one of the most democratic ways of addressing this problem is to just pick up your phone and call your representatives in your local districts and tell them that you want to see this issue be addressed through a lot of legal procedures. You want to see legislation on these problems. We all as a society need to be able to create a world where gender and sex and race and all these factors don't make you less of a person. I think that's something we can all agree on. And so to do that, we all should get involved and not stop to work hard to create a sense of equality in this world. So that was my presentation, my topic, and I hope everybody learned a little bit about creating visibility for trans people and providing them with better healthcare. And hopefully we take away something good from this and create a better world for our future. Thank you.